The disaster at Bull Island,
the tri-state
when
home, know
300,000
nothing about the
people
Bull
shared
Island
6
Music
toilets,
Festival. It
and
happened
chaos
50 years
reigned
ago
supreme.
on Labor Day weekend.
Welcome back to Horror Funk Town, the channel that drags you headfirst into the wildest, weirdest, and most terrifying tales of human misadventure. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most chaotic events ever disguised as a music festival, the Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival, more infamously known as the Bull Island Festival. Get ready for a tale of rock and roll dreams turned into a horror show, complete with 6 toilets for 300,000 people, rampant anarchy, and some of the worst decision-making in the history of event planning. The dream that turned into a nightmare. Imagine you're a young, ambitious music promoter in the early 1970s. You've just pulled off a decent-sized festival and you're feeling pretty good about yourself. What's the next logical step? If you're Tom Duncan and Bob Alexander, the answer is obvious. Go bigger, much bigger. The duo set their sights on creating a 3-day festival that would rival, maybe even eclipse, Woodstock. They secured a lineup that any rock fan would sell their soul to see. Black Sabbath, Fleetwood Mac, The Eagles, Joe Cocker, Rod Stewart, Ravi Shankar, and The Doors. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, just about everything. Before Duncan and Alexander could even begin to count the money they were sure would come pouring in, reality began to bite. They had sold tickets, booked the bands, and splashed a full-page ad in Rolling Stone magazine. There was just one small problem. They hadn't bothered to secure the necessary permits. Minor detail, right? When the authorities caught wind of the massive festival planned for Chandler Raceway in Evansville, Indiana, they slapped the organizers with a restraining order faster than you can say poor planning. The event was deemed a public safety nightmare waiting to happen, and the courts agreed. But Duncan and Alexander were not the types to be easily dissuaded. They were $700,000 in the hole and desperate to pull off their rock and roll extravaganza. Bull Island, the site of the disaster. Enter Bull Island, a remote, marshy peninsula on the Wabash River, technically located in Illinois, but accessible only from Indiana. It was an isolated piece of land that seemed perfect for an event that no one wanted. The organizers thought they had found the ideal loophole. Illinois courts might have jurisdiction, but Indiana authorities couldn't enforce their restraining orders on an island they couldn't reach. It was the perfect location for a disaster. As word spread about the new location, thousands of fans began making their way to Bull Island. The promoters, in a desperate bid to make the festival happen, promised 500 portable toilets, 40 water wells, full medical facilities, and even security guards trained in karate from Chicago and LA. What the fans got was something entirely different. By Friday night, roughly 50,000 people had already arrived at Bull Island, and the organizers' promises were exposed as lies. Instead of 500 portable toilets, there were only 6. That's right, 6 toilets for an estimated 300,000 people. It didn't take long for those toilets to become unusable, and the festival grounds quickly earned the charming nickname Turd Fields. But we'll get back to that delightful detail later. Traffic jam from hell. If you've ever been stuck in traffic, you know how frustrating it can be. Now, imagine being stuck in a 20-mile-long traffic jam with thousands of other cars, all headed to the same place, a place you are starting to suspect might be the 7th circle of hell. That was the reality for the countless fans trying to reach Bull Island. As the roads became increasingly gridlocked, many people abandoned their cars and started walking. The trek was long, the weather was miserable, and the destination was far from worth the effort. But hey, it's a rock festival, right? What's a little discomfort compared to the chance to see your favorite bands? except of course that many of those bands were about to pull the ultimate no-show. The festival that wasn't. The festival was set to kick off on Saturday, September 2nd, with Joe Cocker as one of the first headliners. But as the crowd of over 200,000 waited eagerly, they were met with disappointment. Cocker's management took one look at the massive, unruly crowd and demanded an additional $30,000 for him to perform. The promoters, already drowning in debt and chaos, couldn't pay, so Cocker simply didn't perform. He wasn't the only one. Black Sabbath, with Ozzy Osbourne at the helm, also demanded an extra $30,000 before taking the stage. Once again, the promoters couldn't come up with the cash, so Sabbath bailed. The Faces, featuring Rod Stewart, also decided that Bull Island was a no-go after their manager deemed the site unsafe for the band. Less than 20% of the promised acts actually performed, leaving the crowd to stew in their own frustration, boredom, and increasingly unbearable conditions. The descent into anarchy. As the music died, so did any hope of maintaining order. The facilities at Bull Island were, to put it mildly, a joke. The 6 toilets quickly became unusable, and with no showers available, the Wabash River became a cesspool of human filth. Thousands of people bathed in the river, turning it into a festering soup of mud, sweat, and God knows what else. Food was another disaster. Vendors, seizing the opportunity, jacked up prices to absurd levels, $10 for a hamburger, which would be around $70 today. With no food trucks able to navigate the gridlocked roads to restock supplies, the situation quickly became dire. People were hungry, frustrated, and starting to turn on each other. On Saturday morning, around 2,000 people looted the island's only food center, vandalizing trucks in the process. By Sunday, the situation had reached a boiling point. Food trucks were hijacked, looted, and set on fire. In one of the most desperate acts of the festival, some attendees reportedly killed and butchered a cow for food. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, the rains came. Torrential downpours turned Bull Island into a quagmire, with mud pits swallowing up tents and adding to the general sense of despair. The combination of hunger, frustration, and soggy conditions led to riots, scuffles, and the total breakdown of any remaining semblance of order. The final nail in the coffin. By Sunday night, the festival was in full meltdown. The few remaining acts cancelled, and the crowd, now furious and desperate, started tearing the place apart. The stage was looted and set on fire, along with several food trucks and whatever else could be torched. The promoters, realizing they had lost all control, fled the scene in a helicopter, leaving behind a burning, riotous wasteland. In the end, of the 37 acts booked for the festival, fewer than 12 actually performed. What was supposed to be a historic event turned into a financial and logistical disaster. The promoters had hoped to make millions, but instead they faced hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses and a mountain of legal troubles. The aftermath: lawsuits, and more lawsuits. If you thought the festival itself was a nightmare, the aftermath was even worse. The organizers were slapped with lawsuits from all directions. A neighboring farmer sued them for compensation, claiming that his cattle had died from marijuana inhalation. An instrument rental company sued for damages to a grand piano after festival goers used it as a toilet. The state of Indiana and Posey County sued for damages, and the lawsuits dragged on for nearly a decade. And then there was the matter of cleaning up Bull Island, which had been transformed into a gigantic landfill. The landowner eventually had to bulldoze the site, burying tons of trash and debris. He sent the organizers a bill for $20,000, but of course, it was never paid. A legacy of failure. The Erie Canal Soda Pop Festival was supposed to be a legendary event, but it became legendary for all the wrong reasons. It's remembered today as one of the biggest disasters in the history of music festivals, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition outstrips ability and when greed and poor planning collide. For those who were there, Bull Island is a memory filled with disbelief, frustration, and perhaps a bit of dark humor. Because really, what else can you do but laugh at the absurdity of it all? Unlike Woodstock, which became a symbol of peace and love, Bull Island is remembered as a dark chapter in the history of rock and roll, a festival that descended into chaos and left a trail of destruction in its wake. So, if you ever find yourself thinking about organizing a massive festival in the middle of nowhere, remember Bull Island and maybe, just maybe, reconsider. Because sometimes it's better to aim a little lower and actually hit the target than to shoot for the stars and end up crashing back to Earth in a blaze of failure. Thanks for tuning in to Horror Funk Town, where we bring you the darkest, weirdest, and most terrifying tales from the edge of reason. If you enjoyed this trip through festival hell, hit that like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will make you think twice about ever leaving your house again.